This is Ocean to Ocean for Nothing Media, and I'm going to have a talk with Ben FINKE. Is that the right way to pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
Cool, cool. Yeah, Ben is someone who I believe from our previous talks, you told me since junior high that a sort of seeking began, or maybe even younger. Yeah? Go ahead, yeah.
Oh, I was just saying it was in high school.
Oh, high school, okay, cool. Yeah, that there was, that you were drawn to, well, actually you could start the conversation yourself. Tell me, how did you begin as a seeker, and, you can go from there.
Well, I guess the thing that kind of turned on that light or whatever was it was actually when I was a senior in high school. The English class I was in, we read Siddhartha by Herman Hesse, and that was just sort of an introduction to, I guess, thinking of life in a different way. I don't know. Because, I don't know, I was a really frustrated kid and not very good self-esteem. And so I was definitely looking for answers in a way, looking for meaning in a way, and then also just looking for identity as well. I don't know. I feel like it started in a very mundane manner, perhaps even. But it's interesting that is a fact, though, because after being introduced to thinking differently or thinking more deeply or however you want to say, the next things that I was introduced to was Alan Watts, and then I happened to find Prior to Consciousness by Nisargadatta Maharaj at the flea market.
Wow.
And yeah, from there,
that's a big jump.
I just kind of
going from Alan Watts to Prior to Consciousness. That's kind of a big jump almost.
Yeah, well, I mean, in a span of probably months, I went from nothing like that to Siddhartha to Alan Watts to Nisargadatta.
So when you first started reading that Nisargadatta book, did it make sense? Did it just seem crazy? What was your learning curve or initial feeling about it?
Well, I think that's actually asking if it makes sense is pretty perfect, because that's, I think, a good way of describing my initial approach of trying to make sense of things.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a little bit of how I approached that book, as well as approached Alan Watts, in terms of trying to make sense of it, trying to piece it all together. And I think it's still something that I have a tendency to do, but just trying to make sure I am I have a firm grasp or whatever, a solid conceptual logical network of ideas or whatever.
Right, and how has that changed over the years? Because you said, is it still? You said there's a part of you that still enjoys that or does that, but is there some? How has that changed now?
I think it's kind of that I am just not as expectant. I'm not expecting as much from it. yeah, I think, I guess, like, to put it really short, I've just, like, overall calmed down. Like, I still have my time, but I'm just not as, I'm trying to find a better way to put it, but I guess just, like, I'm just not as, like, attached to it. Like,
Yeah,
it's something that just kind of happened through me.
yeah,
And I guess, like, in the past, like, I would want to, like, try and get recognition, or I would try and get, like, at least acknowledgement or whatever for, like, understanding things. But I'm just not as concerned with that anymore, I guess.
yeah, yeah. It's yeah. Well, with Nisargadatta in particular, and let's say that book, which I'm a little familiar with. I mean, his language can be so, it can make it sound pretty complicated if you're trying to understand it all intellectually, because he uses a lot of different words like awareness and consciousness, which he has very separate definitions for. And then there's quite a cosmology almost to the way he puts things. And yet, I feel like, what he's really trying to get across is not in any of those concepts. It's much simpler.
Yeah, and that's something that did stand out from the beginning, because I wasn't just reading Nisargadatta, I was also paired with Alan Watts. So
Yeah.
I was like, you're familiar with Alan Watts. He's very logical. He's very philosophical.
And he also, he has a beautiful way of putting things in layman's terms, really.
Sure, yeah.
He doesn't yeah, with language. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was, anyway, reading Alan Watts and Nisargadatta at the same time. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just like I was trying to understand it, trying to, like, put all the pieces together. And I think that was helpful to an extent because, yeah, I mean, it's just like the way I see, like, teachings at this point is that there are stories which help loosen your grip on other stories, something we've talked about before.
Yeah.
And understanding, like having a degree of understanding of, like, the teachings or whatever, I guess, like, I don't know, for, like, a really basic example, just, like, acknowledging that things are impermanent, like,
Yeah.
acknowledging that things will wear down and break, and you'll have to do maintenance, and it's not always going to be new. Like, that's always prevalent in life because, like, I like computers, I like my stereo system, I like my car. I mean, even just any everyday thing, there has to be maintenance. It's, yeah. And so it's just like taking things that I guess could be, in a way, very basic, but then applying it in a very deep way to your own psyche and your own life. And, like, just that gradual process of challenging your complexes, your stories that bind you or cause you grief in whatever various way. Like,
Yes. So with the example you gave of, acknowledging the impermanence and the deterioration of all things physical, how so you're saying that there was a moment where maybe you had that occurred to you and something changed?
that's the thing, is I don't feel so much like, I hear a lot about, like, people having experiences or having aha moments, and I feel like I maybe have had some moments, but they're never really so related to like understanding how things work. It's usually more of like an emotional thing, like letting myself have emotions. And so like, yeah, just like, I don't know, like breaking down, crying, or things like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. There's something beneficial in having and acknowledging and trying to express in a healthy way your emotions. Like
Yeah.
that's something um, something that I actually also ran into pretty early on was Osho. And I feel that what I took from that was a lot of his ideas around not repressing things.
Right.
And so yeah, I guess when I have had things that felt like an intellectual breakthrough or like a psychological breakthrough, it was usually more I just became fixated on an idea, I think, and it was like attractive at the time and evoked a lot of emotion at the time. But I mean, it's just not lasting, right? I mean, there's the continuing inertia of the patterns that have built up over years, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it's like sort of noticing that those patterns are just doing what they do. And, it might feel like there's someone changing it in this way or that, but then that's just another thought. That's just another feeling. It's all, I mean, it really just feels like it's all just doing itself to me. But, and if you think about it logically, I guess, there's genetics, there's your environment. We're speaking English. We didn't come up with this language. We might put our own little subtle variation on how we say words, but and which words we choose over other words. But even that, it's not really a choice. It's things that are, even that probably just comes from our environment and, yeah, and just who knows what. I mean, even when I say, that's something I guess Ramesh said was up-to-date conditioning and genetics is causing everything. Nisargadatta called it food going in and food going out of the body, like all influences taken in, going back out in some variation. Yeah, but I don't even know if any of that's ultimately true. But when you think about things that way, it does relax the feeling of like there's no, it's, I don't know, what does that bring to your mind, those ideas?
Well, I had in mind a comment on from before. We were talking about how in my experiences there's not really been like any lasting intellectual change that I like keep with me.
Right.
What I think that kind of points out is that I mean, it's again back to the kind of impermanent thing. It's like I think a tendency of a lot of people, and definitely myself in the past more so, is to try and find like some lasting thing or like some thought or like some way of thinking of things that like fixes it. Like if only I can like see it this way or think of it this way and maintain that space it evokes or whatever, then it'll be okay. And then we get frustrated when we can't maintain it forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, on the extreme end of this sort of topic you're bringing up, I've heard of at least one person who sort of claimed to have some sort of shift and awakening that they remained aware of and spoke about, and then, but they were older, and at a certain point they got dementia or something like this, and it appeared that it went away, to them and to others, perhaps, and the idea that there's something outside of the brain that can know this, and yet I don't feel like the brain is the thing knowing this either, and I don't think there's anything to know. So it's all pretty paradoxical, but what you're saying about the impermanence, I think that's kind of a very grounding example, just knowing that, our brains, which give us the ability to speak and talk like this, really, and point to what we're saying can't really be put into words, how that very brain can actually deteriorate, in old age, and then somehow appear to not know this anymore. But the funny thing is, there's nothing to know. And it's really like the body is just doing what it does.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing with like trying to understand how it works, is like you can have like your best guesses, and they're all probably like right and wrong, right? But it's never going to be perfect.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by the best guesses are right and wrong?
Well, just in that you can look at anything from like innumerable perspectives. And so something as simple as like 2 + 2 = 4, like everyone will pretty much agree that that's correct. But that's only because of, like you were saying, like we're speaking English, we're thinking with these numerals that humans have made up, and like we made up these rules of like what these symbols mean.
Yeah.
And like mathematics at all.
Yeah.
And yeah, like so there is a perspective from which like it would feasibly make sense that 2 + 2 = I don't know, 7,000, like whatever you want, because in the end it's just convention. It's just like an agreed upon way of doing things that isn't objective, really. It attempts to be objective, but I mean, it's just like any mode of measurement, there's margin of error, right?
Yeah. So is anything objective?
Yeah.
Here, can we pause it?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, is anything objective?
Well, I mean, it's the same as anything, yes and no, because in that we are getting as close as we can get to being logical and being observant and like whatever. That's still like, we would call that objective from like a scientific perspective. Like if it's something that we can measure, something that we can like see and like decide is fits into the box of tangible, and we call that objective. But that's still just our symbolism, our representational, conceptual interpretation of things. It's not how things actually are. Like we can try and be objective and say that like this table is so many inches long, but like I was saying, there's always margin of error. Like even things that seem simple, as like saying this is a window, like that's a general concept. Each instance is an individual, which is infinitely different if you look to the right degree of detail, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just pointing out that the realm of thought and like the realm of like consciousness or whatever are like separate. Then again, that's also just concept, just a way of understanding, a way of measuring. And yeah, that's what it means to me when it said that like it can't be said, or it can't be known, or things like that. It's like very logically, because anything known is dualistic.
Right.
It's finite. Is it has boundaries. There's a conceptual pattern which like denotes this is it, this is not it. Which is all, yeah, like I said, it's all imposition, it's all interpretation. It's not raw.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier how, you know, something about this, I don't even know what to call this, what we're talking about. I guess we could say non-duality. That's what it's going to say in the title of the video, probably. But these discussions on non-duality and impermanence and whatever you want to call it, you said somehow this has brought about emotional changes for you, or bouts of crying, maybe like a release of stored emotion, or maybe like even unproductive thought patterns that were released. Maybe I'm sort of inferring from what you said. I'm curious, like, how do you, yeah, would you care to expound on that a little bit more?
Sure. Yeah. Well, everyone has their own like stories, their own complexes, their own way of looking at life, the things that are relevant to them, their relationships that they have in mind, like just their like entire conceptual associated map of their psyche, of their psychology, of their understanding of life in the world. And I think that so someone that I've been exposed to, I've never actually read anything from her, just bits on Facebook, but Byron Katie,
Yeah,
and her work.
I love Byron Katie. Yeah, and
yeah, I really resonate with that.
Yeah,
and it's like the teachings are just a way to challenge your thoughts, and from there it's just like a gradual process of, like, for instance, like I've dealt with and still do deal with like a lot of guilt and like fear, and like I can be pretty defensive and get pretty angry, and there's always stories around those feelings, around those situations, like who am I in the situation, who is the other person in the situation, or whoever else or whatever else is involved, and like what is happening, and like having those negative reactions, having those negative emotions. Yeah, they always come with a story, and it's not always rational. It usually depends on some like faulty logic, which is usually something like this and this is always this way, or this and this needs to be a different way, or whatever. And like I often struggle with feeling like I need to be more productive. And something I struggle with too is I don't like when I don't feel that people are showing me respect. I guess I don't take blatant disrespect too well. But I can challenge the stories that come with those things. And I mean, it's hard. Some of it is just giving yourself time. And yeah, I think that has been a huge aspect of my like development or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting.
My psychological growth.
Sorry, psychological growth.
Yeah, just like my psychological growth has been forgiving myself, and yeah, like allowing myself to have feelings, and
That's beautiful.
forgiving myself, but still trying to challenge those stories. And so, like, back to a more direct example, it's like when I think I need to be more productive, I don't. I'm not. That's not who I am right now. I'm not feeling productive. I don't feel I have the energy for it. If I try, it's just going to be hard to even think. And so, like, why force myself? That's something that I've been kind of vibing with lately, is like just being reasonable. And I guess this doesn't sound very spiritual or non-dual or whatever, but
Yeah. But no, but it's beautiful though. Yeah, I think anyone with a pulse, with a heart, is gonna think it's better to not beat yourself up over things, and it's better to feel more relaxed in the body than to feel stressed out over stories that are ultimately just that, just a story. But I guess, since most of the viewers here, or listeners are going to be, coming to some degree from a non-duality background where these sorts of things aren't always talked about in the more radical non-duality circles of it's more of a focus on there's nothing to get out of this because there's no one to get anything. And this is the sort of language and perhaps, experience or non-experience of those who use that language. But then, yeah, but then me personally, I feel, yeah, personally, as a person, I wonder what some of these people are like in their private lives and how that the non-duality message or non-experience or whatever has affected them. And I assume it is very much like what you're describing. The difference, it seems to be, to me, is that there's less of an expectation that there's an end to anything, or that there's a best way to be, or I definitely resonate with the idea of psychological growth or emotional healing. But for someone who's going to the self-help section of the bookstore, they might be trying to get to an ultimate state, or maybe not. I shouldn't make that assumption. Everyone's trying to heal and should, to some degree, if they have something that needs to be healed. But I guess what I'm getting at is, from the non-dual perspective, all this is still just a story, the healing and the growth. And yet on the relative level, it's very beautiful and important. And it makes life easier when you have less neuroticism and things like that. So, yeah, what would you say to people coming from that perspective, that some people will probably hear what you're saying and what I'm saying and thinking that we're talking about trying to get somewhere, or we're talking about trying to improve the situation for the character, and that can seem like it's only going to create more suffering because you're reinforcing the idea that there is a character, or that ending suffering is. Do you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's paradoxical, right? And so, like I was saying, it seems like one of the most productive ways to heal psychologically is effectively to do nothing about it, is to like forgive yourself and allow yourself to have it and see it. And yeah. And like all of these things come into play, like there not being a doer also, or not being a self. But I just feel like in my life, thinking that way has not been as relevant to me personally. But I mean, to each their own, right?
Right.
But I feel like I probably don't have a very different result. Because, I mean, it's different ways of pointing at the same thing, right? It's different perspectives, or whatever. But I feel like the result is that I just kind of let myself happen. Like back to being reasonable, like I can't like stop myself from having anxiety. I can't stop myself from thinking what I do. I can't stop myself from caring about what I care about.
Right.
So, yeah. And I think, I don't know, it's funny because, I mean, back to things being paradoxical, it's like the best way to understand things is to not worry too much about understanding them, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I almost feel like it doesn't really, like, it makes me think of a little bit of, like, how some people will change the words that they use when they've been exposed to spirituality. Like, they will start only referring to themselves as this body,
Right.
or things like that. And I just don't, I mean, if it works for them, then sure. But, like, I guess for me, I just don't see that it's really relevant because the concept behind whatever words could be completely different from person to person, and they could mean the same thing.
Right.
And so, like, when I think of, like, oh, I have to do this thing, like, I don't know, it's just the story, I guess. It's just,
Well,
I don't know, the words aren't what's important.
they're not. They're not. And I think that's kind of a stepping stone, maybe, where you change your words to try to get your brain to think differently, or your mind is trying to figure something out. Like you said, when you first started reading Nisargadatta and listening to Alan Watts, there was something for your mind to chew on in that was enjoyable and probably helpful on some level. But at a certain point, you realized there was nothing to really figure out. And at that point, what difference do the words make? Whether I say it's me having an experience or not having an experience, or whether it's me or just the body or just the character, you're right. These words are just sounds, and what's behind them, or I don't know. I don't even know what's behind them. But it would be, it's probably pretty different person to person. Like when you see the color green and I see the color green, we have no way of even knowing if it's the same thing we're seeing.
Right. And it makes me think of, like, the question of, like, people trying to, like, figure out if anyone's really enlightened or not. Like,
Right.
who cares? Like, they're who they are, or whatever you want to say. Like, however you want to measure it is going to be subjective and based on perspective and all those things.
Well, I guess there's yeah, it's when I think about it, I guess what comes to mind is, as a mammal species that we evolved from, it's I think we're sort of hardwired genetically to look to someone with confidence, the alpha of the tribe, and they're going to lead us to the, fight off the lions or find the fruit, or find food or shelter or protection. So we're sort of hardwired to exist as a pack in a way, as a tribe. Humans are clearly extremely tribal animals, and so yeah, so when somebody speaks with great confidence and say they're enlightened or say that they don't exist, people tend to, you know, believe them and copy their language because, it seems like they have a successful strategy that they want. UG Krishnamurti said this is all just about pleasure seeking. It's like seeking of enlightenment or the dropping away of the self or any of these things. It's just another form of, the individual trying to seek a pleasure or be free from pain. And there's nothing wrong with that either, really. It's not something I think needs to be criticized. But yeah, I mean, those are what comes to my mind on it. But what was there a point when you used to like think, oh, this person's enlightened, that person isn't, and then at a certain point you just stopped caring, like you said?
I think so. I think it was actually pretty recently. I think it probably still crosses my mind. I think I've just been interacting with that like side of Facebook. Like that's where most of my like spiritual conversations happen, on Facebook, and I just haven't been interacting with that as much lately, so it's hard to say, I guess. But yeah, I think it often would come up mostly when I felt that someone was being unreasonable or like, yeah, I mean, that pretty much sums it up. And I would like definitely have the thought cross my mind, like, oh, this person's obviously like attached to this or whatever. But yeah, I guess it also kind of came with my like somewhat more recent departure from that space a bit. It's just like I don't really care as much. And I think that's something that's been kind of like spreading throughout my life in general, is like kind of a positive not really caring. Because I feel like I used to think a lot about like wanting to get somewhere with my life or like having recognition and more money and like, the typical thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's just like apparent in every little thing that happens that like it's gonna be fleeting, and it is fleeting now, and
Fleeting.
I don't know. It's also just kind of out of mind lately too.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't know.
Well, some speakers say that this is ordinary. It's a common word for it. And there's this saying, before awakening, chop wood, carry water. After awakening, chop wood, carry water.
Right.
Nothing special.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's something I was thinking earlier, is I just kind of do what is reasonable and what is like functional and what I enjoy. Yeah, I think that's been something I've been really getting in touch with too lately. Just being able to focus on what I enjoy and want to do naturally and what I care about naturally. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's pretty straightforward that would make life feel more fulfilling, which I guess it does. Not that, I don't know. I guess that's something that I feel I enjoy.
Yeah, well, Paul Hedderman, the speaker, he says that if you try to use non-duality to solve the problems of duality, it doesn't really work. But something about this message, this approach, whatever. It's the character tends to travel lighter as a byproduct, just sort of naturally. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from what you're saying is there's less of trying to like figure something out and that relaxes you. And there's less of a trying to, you know, get to an endpoint, you know, and or is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I definitely used to be much more concerned with like achieving some state as well. That would be like different or like a permanent change of perspective to just like watching like a permanent out of body experience or something. But I don't care as much anymore. I mean, I don't. That's actually something I think about very little. Uh, I think it's actually been several years that my main concerns really have been more around psychological health and not really any sort of like spiritual end goal. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like lately I've been feeling less spiritual, more functional, but I definitely feel that it's still like heavily influenced by like philosophical and spiritual ideas. I mean, that's just how I live my life, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Makes sense to me. Yeah. Gosh.
yeah,
Well, mm,
I kind of feel that it's almost like rather than going out and trying to find like someone else's network of ideas to try and make work, I am just like taking just what I need, right? Um, and so what that means to me is just like the psychological emotional hurdles that I encounter. Um, I only use what I need to confront any negative self-talk or whatever it might be, or uh, something very valuable too is just like tools to calm down, like just focusing on your breath and like feeling it in your body, and like yeah, I don't know. I guess I just find that valuable to me.
right. And I think just yeah, the, what I'm getting from what you're saying there is that like these are practical tools and practices that help calm your mind and body, but you're not necessarily trying to become enlightened from them or reach some permanent state from them necessarily.
No, it's more of just like having compassion for myself, I guess.
Yeah.
Uh, as well as, it's I feel like it's not really different than wanting to play some video games or caring about uh, my co-op I work for and wanting to do work for it because I care. It's just like what naturally happens. It's what I naturally want to do. Is like this body just naturally wants to like try and improve its situation, and it just. I think there's also a degree of just enjoying, uh, like we've talked about before. Like I just kind of enjoy being a little ritualistic, a little methodical, um, and like I do enjoy logic and intellectual things, and so just like understanding my psychology and seeing what happens, seeing my triggers or whatever, however you want to say it, seeing the things that influence my emotions, uh, like what they are, how they are, the stories around it, and yeah, it's just interesting as well. So I guess I'm fortunate fortunate in that way, maybe, but whatever. Do.
Yeah, it's acknowledging and appreciating what the experience is of being in this body, of existing as this, in the way that you exist, as I exist. And that's going to be different person to person.
Yeah, and I think that's totally something that I valued when I was interested in Osho, is that's one of his big talking points, is being yourself. And so I guess that's like pretty fundamental to how I live my life as well. It's just like allowing myself to be myself. And these are the things I like to do. These are the things that are relevant to me. And however they got there, it's me.
Yeah, and it sounds like over time there's been like less of a feeling that there's a better, that you shouldn't be that way, or that there's that's where so much suffering comes for people, where they think, oh, I'm still thinking thoughts, I must be doing a horrible job at being non-dual or a meditator or spiritual. I'm still having emotions. What's wrong with me? Look at, Osho or whoever. People just look at these gurus, and some of them will think that they're existing in some whole other paradigm where there's no one there anymore, and that means that they don't ever get sad or angry or something.
Right.
When that can create more suffering, because then there's judgment on top of the emotions and thoughts, like, oh, I shouldn't be having these thoughts, I shouldn't be feeling this emotion. Whereas what you're describing is, like you said earlier, there's sort of an apparent paradox there, where when you stop trying to change it, it actually might relax on its own a little bit.
Yeah, and that's totally like a thing, is when you stop having to like yourself, you start to like yourself. I don't know. I mean, there's something about it that does just make it like, I feel that something that happens when you're really caught up in a negative emotion, a negative story, is you often like seek validity in your feeling or in your anger, as though you didn't have it. And often what people will do is to like elaborate on the story to further support themselves or whatever. And I mean, it just gets in the way, right?
Well, lately, I think we talked about this before, but I find the topic of narcissism very interesting in this respect, because it's exactly what you're describing. It actually comes from a place of insecurity and this feeling that there needs to be a solid sense of self. And so it's projected out onto the world, this image of this is what I am. And there's this constant, attachment and almost addiction to getting feedback about this, look at me, I'm this, acknowledge me for being this. And I think everyone has that to some degree. I think that's just part of being human, but some more than others, and some in ways that are healthier and less healthy than others. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to some degree, I just try and not worry about it too much. I think that's been kind of my answer for a lot of things, is I think very often we're able to think, I think this is kind of what I was trying to get at with, like, trying to elaborate on the story usually is not productive, is we're usually able to think more than we're able to do. And so I really try and just like make headspace for like what I need to do, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just like keep to my business in a way, but not in a like strict way, not in a like shutting other will outweigh just like for my own head and just for what's practical, because I can only do so much. And so like I take care of myself and my relationships, and yeah.
I guess I brought that up because, it's something that, I guess I'm just bringing up my own thing because that was something I've struggled with, that dealing with people who are narcissistic, and you've been a helpful friend to me through some of that time. You've actually given a lot of helpful insights. And when I try to think about it, your insights were mostly just very practical of just, if something doesn't feel good, you don't need it in your life. It's really as simple as that. And beyond that, you're right. You don't need to understand anything. You're not going to really understand anything anyway. So there's no need to try to figure anything out. Sticking to what you're drawn to. Well, maybe there is to some degree, but you're talking, the way you're talking, it just makes me think, just how simple, that simplicity, just always has the answer, and it's not an answer, it's just, one step at a time, like the Buddhist walking meditation. It's like that. Like there's no need to think about a future that doesn't exist. You just do what's practical for now.
Right. I mean, that does actually sometimes include thinking about the future. But I feel that I've gotten better and better at only thinking about the future as much as it seems practical.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. It's unique for everybody. And you don't really assume what might. I mean, yeah, your perspective on all of this might change dramatically in a year or two. You have no way of knowing.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, that's definitely something that I've carried with me, is just that nothing's really certain. And one of my favorite things to say, actually, because I just feel like it's so real, it's so to the point, and it's easy for people to understand. It's just, we'll see. Like, we don't know yet. And yeah, I've actually found that useful in talking to people sometimes when they are speaking in like absolutist terms, or like that things are absolutely this way, or things will absolutely turn out this way. And my response is usually, we'll see. Because things aren't set in stone. Like, what we understand of things is only partial. And so we should, it's just like a constantly being ready to be surprised, I guess.
Yeah. And then maybe just feeling the okayness of whatever is arising right now.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, like, in the end, like, there's so many different aspects you can talk about. There's so many different, like, of these common human stories that grow these spiritual or philosophical explanations. But in the end, it really is, like, I mean, the best way that I found to put it is, like, just, like, going through the raw experience of it. Because, like, we can try and talk about it and explain things and understand these different aspects and these different pointers. But it does kind of come back to that, like, experience without thought. But, like, thought, I mean, it's funny because thought can be there, but it's just like that, that presence or whatever, that space. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, it's like there's I think there's a lot that you can take away from just the concept that like no understanding is going to be final, or it's going to like really hit it, like, and I don't know, there's something about like looking at like your raw experience that just like makes it really stark that what you think about what is happening and what is happening are completely different worlds. And yeah, and so like I said a couple times that like I have my thoughts about things, but a lot of the time it's just kind of out of mind. Is uh, yeah, I guess a lot of overthinking comes from like yeah, trying to solve things and trying to grasp it, trying to understand it, and I guess I've just been not so concerned with that, and so
Yeah.
I just don't think about it so much.
Well, I think that's probably a good note to end on, Ben. I mean, it's a beautiful point. I mean,
Cool.
really appreciate you having this talk.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, and I appreciate you and getting to talk to you. And yeah.
Thank you. Is there anything you'd like to promote or anything like that, or tell people about of yours?
Um, Not really. I guess something that comes to mind, if anyone's interested, is I mean, it's pretty outdated at this point, um, but I did write a book. I sent it to you at one point.
Mhm.
I guess that's the thing. It just popped into my head. Um,
If people want to find that
yeah,
book, would they just contact you personally, or is it on Amazon or
I
anything?
guess so. I don't feel that. I don't know actually what kind of viewership this will get, but I don't know that it'll be an immense amount of people. Uh, yeah, I mean, it was just off the top of my head. I guess people can contact me directly. I'm on Facebook, Ben Finke.
Cool, cool. Well, yeah, thanks again for the talk, Ben, and I'll stop the
Sure.
recording.
Okay.